Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. We do things a little bit differently here. We like to go really deep, like a deep dive into a single source.
Yeah, we want to get to the good stuff, the real meat of things. No distractions, no fluff.
Exactly. We pick one really impactful book or film or sometimes even a piece of art, and we just dig in and, really explore it.
And today, it's Tuesdays with Morrie. This book, it's incredibly moving.
It really is. By Mitch Albom.
That's the one.
Tuesdays with Morrie. An old man, a young man, and life's greatest lessons. I mean, it's right there in the title, Life's Greatest Lessons. So for anyone who hasn't read it, it's about Mitch Albom reconnecting with his old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, years after graduation.
And it's not just any reunion. Morrie is battling ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a terminal illness.
Yeah, and they start meeting every Tuesday. These visits become like a final class almost, just Mitch and Morrie.
A final class about life and death and everything in between.
And I think what makes it so powerful is the contrast. You have Mitch, who's super successful, driven. He's totally caught up in the rat race. And then you have Morrie facing his own mortality with this, incredible grace and wisdom.
Absolutely. Two very different perspectives on life.
So in this deep dive, we're going to pull out those big lessons, the stuff that really makes you think about, what matters, the things Morrie wanted to pass on.
Let's start right at the beginning. Albom describes meeting Morrie for the first time on his graduation day.
Okay.
He remembers him as being physically small, not imposing at all.
Like shorter than average.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
But with a huge presence. He even compares him to like a biblical prophet or a Christmas elf in those academic robes.
Christmas elf. That's a funny image.
Right. It shows that Morrie didn't fit the typical mold of a professor, but he obviously made a big impact on Albom. Even back then, Albom introduced him to his parents. There's a real connection there.
An album mentions that he took every single class Morrie taught.
Everyone.
That's pretty impressive. It shows how much he valued Morrie's teaching.
Absolutely. But then, as often happens, life gets in the way. 16 years go by,
Wow. Yeah, that's a long time.
and Albom is living a completely different life. Super focused on his career, deadlines, achieving success. He even admits to feeling like a different person than the student Morrie knew.
I can relate to that. Sometimes I wonder, am I still the same person I was 10 years ago?
It's a common feeling. We all change and evolve as we experience life.
So what brings them back together after all those years?
It's actually kind of random. Albom is flipping through TV channels, and he sees Morrie being interviewed by Ted Koppel,
Oh, wow, the Nightline guy.
the one and only. And Morrie is talking about his illness, about facing death. His honesty and wisdom just jump out of the screen.
That's powerful to be that open and vulnerable on national television.
It really is. And it's what prompts Albom to reach out to Morrie after all that time. He needs to reconnect with this man.
So tell me about that first visit.
Okay, so Albom goes to see Morrie, and he's literally on a work call right up until he walks in the door.
Oh, no, that's so me. I'm always working.
Right. It shows how consumed Albom is by his career at this point. But the moment he sees Morrie, it's like all those years melt away. Their old student-teacher dynamic, it comes right back.
It's amazing how certain relationships can just pick up where they left off.
And they start talking about all sorts of things. The newspaper strike that Albom is involved in, the war in Bosnia.
Wow, so they jump right into current events.
They do. And Morrie is deeply affected by the suffering he sees in the news. He gets emotional, even though these are people he's never met.
That speaks to his empathy.
Absolutely.
So how do these Tuesday meetings become a regular thing?
It happens organically. Albom just keeps coming back every Tuesday.
That's beautiful.
And early on, Morrie says something that becomes like a guiding principle for their conversations. He says, the most important thing in life is to learn how to give out love and to let it come in.
That's a powerful statement. So simple, but so true.
It really gets to the heart of what matters: connection, love, giving, and receiving.
And I think that's something we all crave, whether we realize it or not.
Right. And as their Tuesdays continue, Morrie's health is obviously declining.
It's a progressive disease, right? ALS.
Yeah, sadly. But Morrie approaches his own mortality in such a remarkable way. He calls death his final project.
His final project.
Yeah, he's basically saying, I'm going to use this experience to teach, to share what I'm learning about dying.
Yeah.
He's almost turning himself into a human textbook.
That's so Morrie, always the teacher.
Exactly. And Albom doesn't shy away from the difficult details. He describes how Morrie struggles more and more each week. Walking becomes difficult, then impossible. He needs help with eating, with everything.
It must have been so hard to witness that.
It was. And there's this one scene where Morrie does this breath counting exercise.
Breath counting.
Yeah, he takes a deep breath and counts how many words he can say before he has to inhale again. And each week, that number gets smaller and smaller.
Oh, wow. That's such a powerful visual. You can really feel the progression of the disease.
It's really impactful.
So how does Morrie cope with all of this, with the physical decline, the knowledge that he's dying?
Well, one thing that really stands out is his conscious decision to limit self-pity.
You mean he didn't just wallow in it?
No, he says he allows himself a little bit each morning, a few tears, but then he moves on. He doesn't dwell in it.
That's incredible. I think a lot of us would just be consumed by self-pity in that situation.
It's a choice. And I think for Morrie, it comes from a place of wanting to make the most of the time he has left. He wants to stay connected to people, to keep teaching, to experience joy. And self-pity just gets in the way of that.
It's almost like he's choosing life over death, even as death is approaching.
Right. And he even says, it's only horrible if you see it that way. It's also wonderful because of all the time I get to say goodbye.
Wow, that's a really profound way to look at it, finding the good even in the face of something so difficult.
He's finding meaning in it, purpose.
Albom also talks about his own anxieties about getting older.
Yes, that comes up a lot. He's worried about aging, especially in our culture that's so obsessed with youth.
It's everywhere, right? You can't escape it.
Exactly. And Morrie offers a completely different perspective. He embraces aging. He sees it as growth, wisdom, experience.
So he's not afraid of getting older.
Not at all. He even says, if you stayed at 22, you'd always be as ignorant as you were at 22, meaning you learn and grow so much throughout life.
That's a good point. I mean, I wouldn't want to go back to being 22.
Right. You've learned so much since then. You've experienced so much.
And Morrie criticizes how advertising plays on our feels about aging.
Oh, yeah. He sees right through that. The way they try to make us feel insecure so we'll buy their products.
It's all about selling us something, right?
Totally. But Morrie has this amazing idea. He says we should embrace all the ages we've been.
What does that mean?
He says, part of me is every age. He means that a part of him is still a child, a teenager, a young adult. He carries all those experiences within him.
That's beautiful. And it's true, in a way. We do carry our past with us.
It's part of who we are.
Mm?
And he says that helps him overcome any envy he might feel towards younger people. Because he remembers what it was like to be that age. He's been there.
Okay, so that makes sense.
And then they talk a lot about money and materialism.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. And Morrie's perspective is really interesting. He says that chasing after things, accumulating possessions, it doesn't bring real happiness.
It's that whole keeping up with the Joneses mentality, right?
Exactly. And he says that often it's a sign of a deeper need for love and acceptance. People try to fill that void with things, but it never really works.
It's like they're trying to buy happiness, but it's not for sale.
Right. And Morrie points out that when you're facing death, money and power suddenly become completely irrelevant. What matters is human connection, love, tenderness.
It puts things into perspective, doesn't it? What's truly important.
Absolutely. And his own lifestyle reflects that shift in priorities. He lives in this simple, uncluttered house. He's lost all interest in buying things.
It's like he's shed all the excess, all the unnecessary stuff.
Right. He's focused on what truly matters.
And he talks a lot about the importance of love and family.
Oh, yes. He says, without love, we are birds with broken wings.
That's a beautiful image.
It is. And he sees family as this incredibly important source of support, especially during difficult times.
The people who are always there for you no matter what.
Exactly. And this prompts Albom to reflect on his own relationship with his brother.
Oh, what's going on with his brother?
Well, his brother lives in Europe, and he's also dealing with this serious illness. But they're not close. They don't communicate much.
That's so sad.
It is. And Albom is struggling with guilt, regret. He wishes he had been a better brother.
It's hard when family relationships are strained.
It is. And Morrie also tells this really touching story about his friendship with a man named Morrie Stein.
What's special about Morrie Stein?
Well, Morrie is losing his hearing. It's becoming really difficult for them to communicate, but Morrie emphasizes that their love for each other transcends words. It's a connection that goes beyond language.
That's so moving. It shows that love can exist even when communication is difficult.
Absolutely.
Another concept that comes up is detachment.
Yes, that's a big one. A Buddhist idea about not clinging to things that are impermanent.
Because everything changes, right? Nothing stays the same.
Exactly. But Morrie has his own interpretation of detachment. He says it doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It's about allowing yourself to fully experience them, to feel them deeply, and then let them go.
So it's not about being emotionless.
No, it's about not getting stuck in your emotions.
So you acknowledge the feeling, you experience it, and then you move on.
Exactly.
But at the same time, Albom doesn't let us forget about the physical realities of Morrie's illness.
Right. There are these moments where he describes Morrie's coughing fits, his struggles to breathe. It's a reminder that this is a real person suffering from a debilitating disease.
It grounds the conversation in reality.
Absolutely.
They also talk about the influence of culture and the importance of individual values.
Yes, that's a key theme. Morrie is very critical of how our culture often promotes self-interest, materialism, competition.
It's like we're all pitted against each other.
In a way, yes. And he emphasizes the importance of choosing your own values rather than just following what society tells you to do.
It's about being true to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses his own physical limitations as an example. He says there's nothing to be ashamed of in needing help. It's society that makes us feel embarrassed about it.
That's a good point. We often internalize these societal norms without even realizing it.
Right. And Morrie cautions against being narrow-minded, against failing to see our shared humanity. He wants us to invest in the human family.
What does he mean by that?
He means building communities based on love, compassion, support, instead of division and self-interest.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
And forgiveness is a big theme, too.
It is. Morrie talks about how holding on to grudges and being stubborn just creates pain.
It's like you're poisoning yourself.
Exactly. And he tells this heartbreaking story about a friend he had a falling out with, a man named Norman. They never reconciled before Norman died, and Morrie carries that regret with him.
It shows how important it is to forgive both others and ourselves.
Absolutely. And he gives Albom this very direct advice. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. Don't wait, Mitch.
There's a real sense of urgency there.
Right. He understands that time is precious.
And as Morrie gets closer to death, they talk about facing it with peace.
Yes. He describes having this terrible spell where he felt like he was at the very end. But then he felt this overwhelming sense of peace and acceptance. He even dreamt about crossing a bridge.
A bridge?
It's a common symbol of transition, of moving from one state to another.
I see.
And this experience leads to a really profound insight. Morrie says that accepting death can actually help us learn how to live more fully.
That's an interesting paradox.
It is. By confronting our mortality, we can appreciate the present moment more deeply. We can focus on what truly matters.
It's about living with intention.
Exactly.
And Morrie says something else that's really beautiful. He says, death ends a life, not a relationship.
I love that quote. It emphasizes the enduring power of love, of connection. The people we love, they stay with us even after they're gone.
It's comforting in a way.
It is.
And at one point, Albom asks Morrie what his perfect day would look like.
Yes. And his answer is so simple, so human. He talks about spending time with loved ones, enjoying nature, having a good meal, even dancing.
It's about the little things, the everyday joys.
Absolutely. Finding happiness in the ordinary.
And eventually, their Tuesday meetings come to an end.
Yes. Albom describes his last visit. Morrie is very weak, confined to his bed. But he's still expressing love, offering comfort.
What a beautiful way to spend his final days.
It is. And then Morrie passes away peacefully, surrounded by his family.
And Albom calls it a funeral in lieu of graduation.
A fitting end to their final class.
Exactly. And Albom talks about how much he's changed through this experience. He's reconnected with his brother, finally expressed his love for him.
That's wonderful.
And he sees the book itself as their final thesis, a collaborative effort that brought Morrie so much joy in his last days.
It's a beautiful legacy.
It really is.
So as we come to the end of our own deep dive into Tuesdays with Morrie, the big lessons really stand out. The importance of love, connection, living authentically, embracing aging, letting go of materialism, forgiving ourselves and others, and finding peace with our own mortality.
These are lessons for everyone, no matter where you are in life.
Exactly. And Morrie shows us that these aren't just ideas to think about, they're ways to live.
Right.
Now.
It's about making the most of the time we have.
Absolutely.
So I think we should leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Okay, what do you have in mind?
Morrie was very critical of certain aspects of our culture. So, for our listeners, I'd ask, what's one cultural norm that you might want to question in your own life, and how can you invest in the human family today?
Those are great questions, things to really think about.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Morrie Schwartz. We hope it's given you something to think about, to reflect on.
Thank you for listening.